All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at an absolutely unbelievable story of survival. We're talking about how Mehmed I took an empire that was pushed to the absolute brink of total annihilation and somehow brought it back to life. If you really want to understand the extreme end of crisis management and what modern state rebuilding looks like at its most intense, well, this is exactly where it starts.
Seriously, how do you rebuild an empire that was literally just wiped off the map? Because that is the massive, existential problem the Ottomans faced in 1402 after their catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Ankara. Just picture it. The state is completely shattered by the Turco-Mongol conqueror Timur. The reigning Sultan, Bayezid I, is captured. The entire army is crushed. For all intents and purposes, the state practically ceases to exist. How does a young prince look at that smoldering ruin and decide, yeah, I can put these pieces back together?
Section 1. The Ottoman Interregnum, Brothers at War. To really grasp this epic rise to power, we have to start at that ultimate low point in 1402. Following Ottoman custom, Mehmed had actually been sent out to the province of Rum as a teenager to gain some governing experience. When the empire completely collapsed, his early life there in Amasya, building up a local power base, became his absolute lifeline. Over an 11-year nightmare of a civil war, he steadily fought his way out of that provincial stronghold. He managed to outlast and outmaneuver his own brothers, finally securing a decisive victory over Musa at the Battle of Chamorlu in 1413 to reunite the fractured state.
Now, analyzing his reign from the viewpoint of contemporary Byzantine historians gives us this incredibly fascinating detail. Ottoman sources call him Çelebi, which means the noble-born. But Byzantine historians use the term Kiritses, meaning Lord's son. And what's wonderfully bizarre here is that later Turkish translations actually mistook that Byzantine word for Güreşçi, which literally translates to the wrestler. Now, while he might not have been a literal guy in a wrestling ring, he absolutely had to wrestle an entire empire back into existence. To survive those chaotic early years, he brilliantly balanced a dual strategy. He knew he couldn't defeat Timur, the guy who literally destroyed his father, so he swallowed his pride. He operated as Timur's vassal and even minted coins bearing Timur's name to justify his own early conquests. But here's the genius part. Simultaneously, on those exact same coins, he quietly stamped his own authority and his own tugra, including his name, Mehmed bin Bayezid Han. It was this quiet, undeniable declaration of his long-term ambition, just biding his time until Timur left Anatolia so he could unleash his true sovereign power.
Section 2. The second founder, consolidating the realm.
Once that brutal civil war ended, Mehmed crowned himself in Edirne and just aggressively started rebuilding. He didn't merely survive, he enacted sweeping administrative reforms that really helped stabilize the post-war empire. He systematically re-established central authority across Anatolia and even pushed back into Europe, conquering Dobruja. He seized territories from regional beyliks like the Jandarids, took parts of Albania, and even captured the Armenian kingdom of Cilicia from the Mamluks. He was literally piecing the map back together, border by border, acting very much as the state's true second founder.
You know, state building is inherently messy, right? His military record definitely wasn't flawless. In 1416, he took his newly rebuilt fleet and challenged Venice off the coast of Gallipoli, and it was a total disaster. The Venetian forces completely destroyed the Ottoman fleet. So while he was this brilliant consolidator on land, his empire still had some very painful lessons to learn about dominating the seas.
Section 3. The Populist Threat, Sheikh Bedreddin's Revolution.
Beyond those external enemies, Mehmed had to manage a deeply traumatized post-war population that was suddenly drawn to a massive social uprising. A decade of civil war leaves people exhausted and impoverished, right? And into that void stepped Sheikh Bedreddin. He was a highly educated Islamic scholar. In fact, he had actually served as the supreme judge for Mehmed's rival brother, Musa. Bedreddin built this deeply appealing populist movement, preaching an incredible syncretism of religious sects and really pushing to erase the social and economic barriers between the rich and the poor. The idea spread from Europe into Western Anatolia like an absolute wildfire.
So, how does Mehmed stop a 4-year revolution? He relies on his absolute most trusted confidant, Grand Vizier Bayezid Pasha. This is actually the exact same man who saved Mehmed's life on the battlefield of Ankara years earlier. Bayezid Pasha hunted down the revolutionary forces, captured Sheikh Bedreddin, and had him hanged in Saris in 1420. It perfectly highlights this stark contrast.
Mehmed cultivated a very public persona as a noble, generous ruler, but behind the scenes, he didn't hesitate for a second to ruthlessly execute his brother's former judge to maintain his central authority.
Section 4. Securing the Dynasty, Blood and Diplomacy.
With the empire relatively stable, Mehmed dives into this high-stakes, incredibly complex game of diplomacy with Byzantine Emperor Manuel II just to secure his family's grip on power. When Mehmed's brother Mustafa suddenly re-emerged out of nowhere to claim half the empire, Mehmed actually struck a deal with Manuel to keep the defeated Mustafa exiled away on the island of Lemnos. But when Manuel tried to use Mehmed's nephew, Orhan, as a political pawn against him, Mehmed did not hesitate. He adopted the brutal Byzantine practice of blinding to permanently neutralize his own nephew.
It is an incredibly calculated and honestly cold succession strategy. You have to remember, the early Ottoman Empire had no regulated succession laws. Technically, any son can rule. Having just survived an 11-year civil war against his own brothers, Mehmed makes this deeply pragmatic, almost heartbreaking choice. He sends his two younger sons, Yusuf and Mahmud, directly to the Byzantine emperor to serve as hostages. It was a purely strategic move designed to guarantee a bloodless transition of power for his chosen heir, his eldest son, Murad II.
And this intensive diplomacy extended right down into his personal life. His sprawling family, which included 4 consorts and numerous daughters, effectively formed a protective political net around his borders. He meticulously managed the education of his sons, all while marrying his daughters off to the rulers of neighboring Anatolian beyliks, like the Karmanids. Now, while some of those husbands reportedly really resented their Ottoman brides, these political marriages were absolutely essential diplomatic tools that stabilized his hard-won state.
Section 5. Legacy of the Restorer, the Green Tomb of Bursa.
When Mehmed finally passed away in 1421, after an 8-year solo reign, he left behind a profound cultural mark. His breathtaking mausoleum in Bursa is world-renowned for the incredible visual symbolism of its intricate green-glazed tiles. This beautiful, deeply serene resting place stands in stark contrast to his incredibly bloody rise to power. And surrounding it, he founded massive charitable foundations, a royal refectory to feed the poor, a local school, and he finally finished the neglected mosque of his grandfather, Murad I. He was deliberately cementing his public legacy, not as a ruthless warlord, but as a generous builder of society.
And history remembers him precisely like this, the restorer, the ultimate survivor who dragged an extinguished dynasty right back into the light. Without Mehmed I, the Ottoman Empire likely would have just remained a footnote in history, totally fractured and consumed by its neighbors. Instead, he became the crucial bridge between the collapse of the early empire and the unstoppable superpower it was about to become under his descendants.
So it leaves us with this really lingering question. Was his brutal, brilliant restructuring the actual cure for the empire, or was it just the beginning of a whole new cycle of conflict? By neutralizing his rivals, crushing massive social revolutions, and literally using his own children as geopolitical pawns, Mehmed I bought his empire a second life. But as history constantly shows us, the cost of that kind of stability is always incredibly high. Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this incredible story of the second founder leaves you hungry to explore even more about the intense complexities of empire building.